Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. We're taking time to discuss construction materials testing and inspection with people in the know. From exploring testing problems and solutions to laboratory best practices and quality management, we're covering topics important to you. Now, here's our host, Brian Johnson.
Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. I'm Brian Johnson.
And I'm Kim Swanson, and we have two exciting guests today.
I'll start by saying we've got these two guests from Oklahoma DOT. First is Sundaram, who is a process improvement engineer. Welcome to the podcast, Siv.
Thank you.
And second, we've got Bryce Hanlon, a geotechnical engineer with the Oklahoma DOT, correct?
Correct.
Welcome to the podcast, Bryce.
Cool. Thank you.
We wanted to talk about geotechnical investigations today, but I think before we get too deep into that, let's talk about what Siv's job is, because she's got a very interesting position. Siv is a process improvement engineer with the Office of Chief Engineer at the Oklahoma DOT. Siv, can you give us in layman's terms what that means?
Basically, that means I don't get to complain about anything at ODOT. I get to fix everything. As many DOTs, we have a lot of procedures and policies all over the place. A lot of it is in people's mind or in head, and when they leave the organization, we are losing a lot of institutional knowledge with a lot of people leaving, retiring. So I'm trying to capture a lot of those processes and update a lot of the policies and procedures. And we're also going through a lot of changes as the way we deliver projects, going from a 2D to a 3D model. So what we need to make sure that whatever processes we have currently is compatible with where we are headed. So that's what I do.
Wow, that is a lot. And you're a PE as well, professional engineer. And this seems like it really has a lot of quality aspects to it. When you approach these challenges, what do you think about? I mean, are you thinking about the engineering aspect of it, or are you thinking more of the quality aspect of it, or all of the above?
All of the above. Start off by talking to people who are actually doing the jobs. And sometimes when you're doing the job all the time, you kind of fail to notice some of the efficiencies you could be putting in place. So we start out by looking at it and then say, hey, is there something we can do here to improve it, or if we can make it easier for you, especially if we are strapped for resources. Even if we can hire somebody today, it'll be 2 years before they become close to being productive. And there's so much institutional knowledge. And like Bryce, for example, he brings a lot of geotechnical knowledge to ODOT, but ODOT itself takes 2 years to learn because a lot of the EITs we hire, we put them on a 2 year rotation. And it still takes a long time to get into the culture and understand that. So I start out by talking to the people to see what are the areas we can improve on. Then we don't want to do things in a vacuum. So the way I came across you is we started sending out a lot of surveys through AASHTO to other states. And I have to tell you, they have been very, very helpful. The community of all the state DOTs support each other, and they were very forthcoming in sharing the information. And that has helped us. So anytime we want to try a new process, that we start off by looking at what other states are doing and see, okay, what are your successes? What are the things we need to watch out? So we're not starting off from scratch on fixing something. And also it gives you credibility when you're trying to change something to say that, hey, somebody else has tried it and this is what they have found.
That's a great idea and very wise to look around to see what else worked. What other departments are you working with? So, I mean, this is geotechnical, but are you working all across every part of the DOT?
Focusing mostly on the pre-construction side, but also reaching across to the operation side to have the communication better. For example, we're doing the multidimensional delivery, which is a lot of states are going into that into 3D models. So in the design world, we are working on delivering models in 3D. And we have contractors who are already taking our design files and building 3D models, and they're creating 3D models using design files. But if you can deliver the 3D models to them, they can construct that. But we have construction in between. We need to get them ready for inspecting things in a 3D model. And then if we have ultimately, our idea is to go into 3D models without having paper copies. If we do, then we have to bring maintenance on board because we have to keep up with any changes we do and then storing those models. So there's a lot of things we have going on trying to get that part of it. Then on the construction side, we're working on a construction manual, and then our construction survey is the last manual was done was in 1989, and we don't do anything like how it's done now. So those are things that we reach out to them and provide them the resources to get that going so that they can update their procedures.
That's really interesting. I don't know the inner workings of like DOTs in general, but do other DOTs or do every DOT have your position, or is this unique to ODOT?
I have not come across anybody yet, but if there are, I would love to meet them because there are a lot of things I like to share.
I think this is so great. Like what you're describing is all about continual improvement, and that is a culture that we have at AASHTO that we love to have process improvements and things like that. So it would be great if all the DOTs had a position like yours.
I think it came from our senior staff, Secretary Gadd. He's fully involved in AASHTO, and I think he has been with the department for a very long time. So, and he's seen all the about different areas where we need some help. And our chief engineer, Brian Taylor, he came from construction, and he is all about providing resources and making sure that we are putting the right people in the right place and getting things efficiently. So we used to have this system of like, okay, you have only so many positions assigned to each job. Now as long as we don't exceed those number of positions, we can move it around and change it around. Like Bryce's job is created in the last 6 months because that was a position which was very much in need. We had bridge division who was looking at bridge foundations. We had roadway division who was looking at pavement design. And we had materials divisions who was doing the soil testing. But we had roadway in between. Nobody was really paying much attention. Something like slope stability, settlement, rock excavation. So even though we were identifying them in the geotechnical report, it wasn't being conveyed to the designers so that they could design around it. And then in construction, the information wasn't always provided to the contractors. So we were running into some overruns, change orders when they encounter rocks or something where we could have saved some money by making the slopes steeper. Those are things, and that's where Bryce is here to help us.
Great segue. And I think you are also giving us some process improvement on how we can host this by moving to the next step efficiently. So thank you for that, Bryce. Now we're going to get into the geotechnical aspect of this conversation. So let's start out with the basics. Tell us about what a geotechnical study is all about.
So just in general, geotechnical studies are mainly you're figuring out what's going on below the ground, because a lot of times you see construction, you see all the stuff that's built on top of it, and a lot of people don't realize that it's what's underneath that's supporting everything. There's a lot of issues that can come up, soil related, groundwater related. There's just a lot of issues that a lot of people aren't educated on. And kind of what you do is you develop a plan to identify all the potential issues and allow the designers to be able to design for it, and then allow contractors to kind of know what they're getting into prior to bidding a project. And yeah, it'll allow things to go more efficiently, but then allow whatever they're building to, it'll last longer than just kind of going after it willy nilly. Like I said, I've been at ODOT now for about a month, and at my previous job, I worked for a consultant where we didn't just do like ODOT projects. We did commercial work, we did residential work, and at various ranges for sure when it comes to geotechnical investigations. Like the DOT actually commits quite a bit of effort into making sure they know what they're getting into prior to building things. Because obviously, if there's a lot of roads that are built that are just torn out, there's going to be a lot of complaints by the public. And, a lot of these residential willing to take the risk just because, it's more of a profit driven kind of thing where they're like, oh, I built something this one time, it worked, it's going to work everywhere. And, obviously a lot of commercial companies and DOTs are more educated and they know that that's not the case. So yeah, the idea is, understand not every site is the same when it comes to soil. So like we got to figure out what's there and be able to plan for it.
Yeah, and I think traveling public does not realize the importance of that aspect of the job because they always look at what's on the top, right? Oh, this
100%.
must be bad asphalt, or it must be bad concrete, or maybe they didn't do it correctly, but it might have nothing to do with that.
No, it's usually actually with pavements, it's, probably 90% of the time it's drainage or water issues or subgrade issues. Like, yeah, that's people only see the surface and they complain about that. But yeah, it's usually an underlying problem. And then once the support system goes away, everything else falls.
So how do you conduct one of these geotechnical studies?
For the DOT, the main people that I'm helping are the roadway divisions and the bridge divisions. And for bridge, it's pretty simple. Obviously, with bridges, they're supported usually on piles or piers. And in Oklahoma, we have relatively shallow bedrock, so I'd say 90% of the bridges are built on bedrock. We take the foundation systems down to bedrock, minimize the risk that is associated with settlement, and go from there. So it's a lot of, from like an engineer's perspective, most of the work is really in planning the projects, like getting out there and seeing where the project is going to be, like where the new structure is going to be for a bridge. Sometimes there's new alignments, so you have to deal a lot with landowners and gaining access. And then once you do that, then it's a lot of just there's processes. Obviously, I'm sure you guys are aware of kind of what goes in the geotech process, but it's drilling, it's sampling, it's testing in the field, collecting a lot of data when it comes to the strength of the soil, the strength of the bedrock, the type of soils, the type of bedrock, and all of that. Well, in groundwater, like I said, groundwater is a big thing. You get all that information together, you can kind of come up with an idea of what conditions you have, and then the designers have guidelines that they follow based on all the data to be able to design whatever structure they're building. Bridge, like I said, is simple. Pavement is actually pretty complex. How we do that here is there's a bunch of different ways, I guess roadways can be built. There's new alignments, there's widenings of existing alignments, there's overlays on existing pavements, there's new pavements that are being, same alignment, but they're raising the grade of it, changing the grade. There's all the different things. We kind of have different methods at ODOT where we kind of go in and test the different areas, see what soils they have at each location. We have a pavement design engineer that basically she takes all of this data and is able to get all the test results and everything and be able to run a pavement design analysis using, there's an AASHTO method, obviously, that a lot of people use, the 93 method. And then there's pavement in me, which is a mechanical empirical method that a lot of people are using. So yeah, it's basically being able to collect the data so that the design engineers can do what they need to do to design whatever structure they're doing, and then also be able to identify issues that contractors in the field may run into. Like Sid kind of mentioned it earlier, a big issue in Oklahoma is like shallow bedrock in certain locations where contractors will bid a job and not realize that there's shallow sandstone or limestone that's very difficult to excavate on the job, and they don't bring the proper equipment on site. Well, they get on site and start digging and they realize they can't get the rock out of the ground, and they call ODOT and ask for a change order, which makes things just difficult and causes problems. And it's basically trying to get all the information available at the beginning and allow everyone to make the proper decisions early on, so that you're not having to make changes later on, and it allows things to be more efficient and timely, obviously.
So there's new testing and then there's collection of data from old tests, I assume, because I know just from being in school, you see these old geotechnical maps or other soil classification maps or some other maps that look ancient that exist. How do you incorporate the existing knowledge with new information that you've got? Because obviously, like the soil and the geotechnical conditions exist. There's not, it's not like they're constantly changing or evolving, but there could be some changes. How do you tackle that?
In general, you have an idea of what you're getting at, because there are, we have the web soil survey that you can get online and check that out and see in general what kind of soils you're going to encounter. But a lot of times we get on these sites and like you don't know if the soil that you're going to be encountering is that it's like an in situ state. It could be the grade could have changed over time where someone brought in import soils, and that's the soil that's potentially going to be supporting whatever structure you're going to be building. So yeah, having an idea of what you're getting into is important. We use the web soil survey a lot we do a preliminary pavement design. So a lot of times in the planning process, you need to have a pavement design kind of in place to be able to develop your grades and stuff of your roadways. So kind of the process that we've used at ODOT is looking at from the web soil survey, kind of generic soil properties that they have on site. And with that, we're able to use correlations to get an idea of what we're going to be getting into. We have resilient modulus, which is a big test that's used for pavement design. We have, an idea based on the AASHTO class of what the soil likely the strength will be, and they can develop a preliminary design from that. And then obviously we have to check it. I mean, you can rely on references and resources so much, but it's the actual data in the field. You need to have that confidence level to be able to design something and be able to build it.
We have over 50 years of data. We found out like our materials division was developing a database, GIS database, and our bridge was trying to do the same thing, and payment was designer engineer was trying to do the same thing. So we brought everybody together, and we are working with our GIS group and getting the old data in a PDF form, put in a GIS reference locations, and making it available to our consultants. We do 95% of our work with consultants for design projects, so making it available to them so that they can use that to refine their scope, and it will save us money and it will save them money and time in using all this. The old data, as you said, the soil doesn't change that much. It's still important to get more recent one, but at least it gives a good starting point. I think Bryce wishes that he had access to some of the old data.
Well, that's great. I mean, ODOT has a massive library. That's what they have so much information all over the state. Probably over the last 70, 80 years, they have reports kind of dating back that far. So a lot of the projects that were built however many years ago, they're having to rebuild it. Even like bridges and stuff are being replaced within that time. So having that data where you can go back and see, oh, the rock is approximately this depth. Whenever you're scoping the project, you approximately know what you're getting into. And if the consultant's doing it, we can educate them on kind of what they're getting into and what to expect. And if we're doing it, we'll know as well. And then same for soils. Like for roadway, unless there's a massive grade change, the soil isn't going to change a lot. So if you know that there wasn't a massive grade change and you have that information in your database, maybe you could do potentially less testing than you would normally need to do because you have a level of confidence on the site that you wouldn't have had if you're just going in blindly.
And moving into the future, we're trying to collect data in a 3D format so we can use it with our 3D model. So when we deliver a model, we're not going to deliver a PDF copy of a report with that. We want to actually deliver how the surface looks at based on the data we collect. And you're probably aware of the DIGS program by the EDC, the Federal Highway. So we're looking at methods how to collect the future data, which would make it compatible with design software the designers are using. Now, right now we use Open Road, but a lot of our consultants use Civil 3D. So we need to make sure that whatever form we are collecting the data, it can be readily imported into both of those softwares so that you don't have to have the geotechnical engineer having to enter the data multiple times.
Another reason why you need to work with others to develop how you're going to solve this problem, right?
Yes. We did an initial survey of the industry, and we found out a lot of our contractors use Civil 3D for their modeling, whereas the state and a lot of the DOTs use Open Roads for their in-house projects, and half of our consultants use Open Roads and half of them use Civil 3D. So we need to be able for those to talk to each other. So we need the same thing with the geotech data to be compatible for those two.
So let's talk about just the project planning process. When does the geotechnical investigation come into play as let's say you're building a new road? How does that work? Where does it fall in line with the project process?
Currently, we are starting geotech after the 65% plan is complete. That's when the NEPA, the environmental documents and the environmental process is complete, because that would help us identify the environmental and make sure that we are not destroying something when we are going out to do the geotech work. However, we do have enough environmental information early in the process, and we want to change the process now to start it at 30% plans so that we'll have the geotech information at 60% plans before the right of way is submitted, so we can make design decisions like steepening the slopes or making our ditches shallower in the rock where there's rock. so that we are not having to change design, sometimes even during construction or at 90% plans, and then having the payment design earlier too. So that's another survey we went sent out to the other states to find out if they're doing any kind of environmental review or when they are starting the geotech. So based on what we found out like we don't really have to wait till environmental process is complete. We can start it earlier with the information we already have available.
So that's another layer of complexity that you're dealing with. So we're not just talking about the stability and longevity of the structures that are going to be built on top of the soil foundations. We're talking about also potential environmental impacts. What environmental concerns are there when it comes to those geotechnical investigations? You don't have to name it all. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but what are the main issues that people worry about?
In Oklahoma, we worry about archaeological sites. There's a lot of native tribal properties here, and there's a lot of archaeological sites related to that. So we need to make sure that first of all, we are not going to impact that. Another thing is we have a lot of old oil fields and abandoned oil fields. So we want to make sure that if we are going to be getting into that, then we get to the next level of having a health and safety plan if we are going to be doing some work out there. And then other thing is we don't want to be doing so many work in waters and wetlands, because if you're doing a project and you're trying to minimize the impacts on waters and wetlands, then you have a geotechnical crew which goes out there and destroys what we're trying to do, because when they're doing the test. So that's why we asked the geotechnical engineer to provide their boring location and how they plan to access that, and provide that to our environmental programs division, and they review that to make sure that they're not inadvertently destroying something which we plan to save later. And other thing is we have some endangered species in Oklahoma, and during certain times of the year, you cannot do work in the water because of the spawning season or the nesting season. You cannot do work in that. So you need to work around that schedule. So those are the main things we need to look at as part of the environmental review.
Well, that's pretty complicated. There are a
Nothing
lot.
easy. Nothing. So yeah, there's always
Yeah.
I
Well,
was an environmental
yeah. That's what I was about
division
to say. She's that was her job here for a while, was making sure that she was in charge of environmental here.
So going from design to environmental, that was you have to look at all different aspects of it.
yeah, and I'm sure many, not just interdepartmental contingencies, but you're talking about external departments as well. And I mean, how do you coordinate with all these agencies?
The environmental, we did deal with a lot of different agencies, like the State Historic Preservation Office. And then our cultural resources group is located at University of Oklahoma, where the state archaeologist is also there. So they can look up a lot of the information right there on the archaeological file to see if the proposed plan is going to impact any archaeological sites. Then we have a tribal liaison who can help us coordinate with the tribes. And we pay for a fish and wildlife liaison at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who helps us coordinate any kind of endangered species issue. And we also have a liaison at the Corps of Engineers, because sometimes if we are going to be getting into the water, you have to get the 404 permit. Even though it's a nationwide permit, you may still have to coordinate that with the Corps. And sometimes we have to go do work in the Corps properties, because a lot of our bridges are over lakes, which are owned by the Corps. So then we have to coordinate with the Corps. So the liaisons help us a lot in getting that coordination done.
I can see why you want to move this to 30% on the timeline instead of where it was, because it sounds like a lot what happened. Now, obviously it takes a lot of time to get this completed. How do you keep everything else moving, knowing that this is kind of lurking in the background as other things are being planned and contracts are being fulfilled and materials and equipment is being purchased and all these other things are going on? How do you deal with all that?
So we started Geotech, before at 60%, but now we're going to start at 30%. But there's 60% percent is when we start the right-of-way acquisition process. So, and moving the utilities before we start the construction, that usually takes about 18 months to 2 years. So geotech is not on the critical path if that, because usually right-of-way is on the critical path. So that could be happening while we are working on the geotech. There are some times we may have to actually acquire the right of way before the geotech crew can get out there, because the property owners, even though the state law allows us to be doing work in the property, not all the property owners cooperate.
They don't like a giant drill rig driving through their property. But people in Oklahoma are very nice. They don't like surprises, that's for sure.
And we send out letters, but we also have the geotech consultants go out and talk to them. And we also talk to the field district so they know that we are out there, so they're not getting a call out of the blue saying, hey, why are you on my property?
Now, Bryce, have you been out in the field?
Yeah.
Tell us about what that experience is like.
Wow, it's messy. Yeah, that's for sure. Oklahoma, it's kind of known for having like red clays, red soil. It's pretty famous here. So my wife knows this, but I have probably 20 pairs of jeans that are just stained orange and red over the years. But yeah, I mean, field work is in Oklahoma. I love it. That is probably one of the biggest things that actually attracted me to being a geotechnical engineer. Is you are allowed to get out in the office and see the state, which I love, and then have more of a hands-on approach to stuff. A lot of design I know is done MicroStation and CAD, and a lot of times the actual field part of that isn't part of that. But with geotech, like I love going and seeing the sites and like basically seeing how the location looks prior to construction, kind of vision how it'll look, after it's done, and figure out kind of what kind of testing and field work needs to be done to be able to provide all the information that everyone will need to be able to design the project. So it's very cool. I think geotech, like I said, I think it's the coolest civil discipline. People will probably argue, but I like you get the full experience. You get the field experience. You get the office experience. You get to be in a lab. There's all sorts of cool stuff associated.
When I talk to people who are in the geotechnical field, they seem like they are very passionate about it.
It's not a big pool of people that want to just go be muddy, but if you like it, I mean, it's very rewarding. Like I say, I got to visit basically the entire state of Oklahoma. There really isn't a part of the state I haven't got to work, and I've met people all across the state, and then over time you kind of develop confidence in knowing kind of this part of the state has this type of subsurface conditions. This part of the state has this. And whenever you go into scoping projects, you have that built-in knowledge, and you can kind of talk to everyone a little bit more educated. But it's great. I wouldn't do anything else. I've been doing it for about 18 years now. And there's been times that I've thought about doing design, and just the thought of me sitting in an office all day, I can't get past it. So that's why I stuck it out for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like you have plenty going on there, but I don't know if AASHTO Committee on Materials and Pavements has gotten into you yet.
I've been here a month, so they kept me pretty busy in that month. So
added him as a non-voting member to the committee, so you'll probably start seeing him at some of those meetings.
Yeah.
That's good. Once we sink our claws into you, we'll start getting you more involved. Does that sound negative, Kim?
Once we sink our claws into you, that's one way to put it, Brian.
Yeah.
Pretty aggressive, yeah.
It is pretty, yeah. We may have to retract that one. As you start getting more involved with the test methods on a national scale, and all the cooperation you've done with the other DOTs, I think it really does play nicely into you getting involved with the AASHTO Committee on Materials and Pavements, and trying to bring some of what you brought to the table, improving the standards overall that everybody uses. So I really think I could see, once you start getting more into sharing that information, there'll be opportunities for you to help work on those committees as well. And I think that'll be rewarding for you. So I hope to see you at those meetings.
I'm sure I'll be there.
Yeah, Bryce is already working on updating our specifications and the scope and the geotechnical rates.
Yeah, a lot of stuff has gone unchanged at ODOT for quite a while. So I worked at a consulting firm, and I basically had to follow the rates and the spec for all that time. And, it definitely needed some updating, which is great. Glad I kind of was given that responsibility. So just being able to kind of deep dive into all the test methods, that's literally been my last 2 weeks. I've just been sitting there going through test methods and making sure it's the most up-to-date version, make sure the version that we're having makes sense for the application that we're using it for. And it's kind of rewarding. It's kind of cool to see I do know the people that wrote kind of the original stuff, and I talked to them a little bit, but just kind of times have kind of moved forward, and we're definitely trying to modernize everything to get to where we're definitely up to date on everything.
And where this AASHTO and ASTM method you're just trying to use?
We're trying to use mainly AASHTO stuff for the most part to have some uniformity. I know a lot of the field stuff is ASTM still, but yeah, for the most part, I think AASHTO has a method for everything. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
We work a lot with ASTM and AASHTO standards, and a lot of us are involved in ASTM committees as well. And the more you work with Committee on Materials and Pavements, the more you'll get to understand how those relationships work between the two committees. But yeah, it works out pretty well, and I'm glad to hear you're getting involved with that and not just keeping all that information in Oklahoma, because I can tell that you guys are really passionate about getting that engagement with everybody you can. And that really helps the whole community, helps the industry out. So thank you for that effort. Civ, you sent that survey out, you got results from the other DOTs. Do you feel like you're on track with most of the other ones? Do you see some changes kind of coming based on the results that you got from your survey to the other DOTs?
We did 3 different surveys. One was about trying to decide where the payment design needs to lie. We're also going through a modernization of trying to break down silos at ODOT. So we bring bridge, a roadway, and traffic all together as design teams instead of having separate divisions. I mean, they still were reporting to multiple division heads instead of just having one thing. So one of the areas we identified was having a specialized design areas and geotechnical areas. So, and as part of that, we looked at where payment design should be. What we found out is there's pros and cons for having payment design in materials and design. With design, you are working with the designers on looking at all the different aspects of it, the things, whereas in materials, you are looking at what actually goes on the pavement. So we figured out the best way is to still have it as part of the design, but have somebody like Bryce who can bring everybody together. So he's going to be connecting pin between having materials, bridge, and payment together. The other survey we did was trying to find out where the geotech, how other states are handling their old geotech data. And we found out most of the states are doing GIS database for storing their old reports as a PDF form. But moving forward, we found out there's whole base and they're looking at open ground. So we're still doing some research on how we want to gather data to, what I talked about earlier, and trying to get the data which can be compatible with our 3D models. And the other one was about studying how other states, when the other states do the environmental review for their geotech. So when I started with the environmental programs division, we were not looking at geotech at all. We were telling the consultants to get their own permits. And they don't necessarily have the resources to get their permits, and they didn't know who to talk to get 404 permits. So we took back the process and we decided to help out. But then it kind of grew, and then it almost became as big as doing an EPA for the geotech. And then we did the survey of other states. We found out that we were on the other extreme. So we're kind of trying to come back to the middle now. So we can get geotech started with basic recon level data for environmental.
With all these 3 surveys, what stood out to you as like the most surprising feedback and the results from those surveys?
The surprising one was where the payment design was, because we were very surprised. We thought for most states would have it as part of the design because that's what we have had it forever. So we were surprised that a lot of states had it as part of the materials division. So that was a surprising one. And then we also thought that a lot of the states would be doing more environmental review for the geotech. And some of them, it's not even part of their process. I think what we are doing is somewhere in the middle, and I think we are covered.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure.
Are you sharing the results of the survey with the other DOTs as well?
Yes, Matt Romero, who is part of the Committee on Materials, he's the one who sent out the survey, and I have to tell you, the committee is so helpful. I've had tremendous responses, so I really appreciate the support the community has. He has been sharing the information. Then I've also followed up on emails to get some additional information, and I get responses right away, like within an hour of sending an email. And those people are very, very helpful.
Yeah, they are passionate about what they do. Just like what we were talking about with geotechnical engineers, everybody in that group is really eager to share knowledge and learn from each other. Now, Bryce, as far as where all this is going, with your background and your understanding of the situation, where do you see the geotechnical investigations going at the Oklahoma DOT? What changes do you anticipate seeing?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think we're just looking for more just kind of consistency. A lot of the spec that everyone has been using, there's a lot of gray areas that, if a consultant's doing the work, they're not really sure what methods to use in certain situations. And then at the time, ODOT didn't really have anybody to be able to guide them in the direction that makes the most sense for the designers and for the particular project. The spec that we had was it was kind of like all or none. Like I feel like we were doing as much testing almost as possible to get as much data as possible, which is great to have that, but all of that costs money. It's kind of a deal where we're looking for a balance to get the necessary data that we need, but also, make sure you're not just spending money on something you don't need. Get that process to where it's good. And then I think basically having all of our historical data and all of our future data in a reusable resource to where we can educate ourselves and the consultants in the future to where we can make more knowledgeable decisions on future investigations and basically not having to start from scratch every time we have a geotech project. I think that's kind of the main goal, is be as educated as possible to where we're doing the work that's needed on every project, not just acting like we've never stepped foot in Oklahoma before every time. It's one of those situations. So
Bryce will be the one-stop shop for everybody so that he can get the
yeah, I'm definitely, I know all the it's a very small community. I either went to school or worked or collaborated with almost every consultant in Oklahoma. So me being here, I am a known resource to where people are comfortable to talk to me about things and definitely know I know what I'm talking about as well. So where if I correct them, they're not just, thinking that I'm out to get them or that. So it's definitely, I think I'll provide a great resource for the DOT in that aspect and kind of get everyone on the same page. A lot of it is, communication's a big thing. I mean, that's kind of my biggest thing coming here, is like I am trying to kind of bring all the geotechs at ODOT together and, get everyone talking to each other and, use their knowledge and share their knowledge with each other, just so that we can all, I keep on saying it, but like being as knowledgeable and using the resources, everything that you have will make the future a lot easier. Just kind of staying in your little corner and not sharing is not great for sure. So it's a big task. Like I said, we're very set in our ways when it comes to geotech in Oklahoma. I have noticed that. I graduated high school in 2004 and started working immediately and for a geotech company, and it has been the exact same process. The spec has changed slightly in that time frame, but this will probably be one of the first decent overhauls that'll happen in a while. So we can hopefully see improvements in the processes. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to other states just to see what they use and definitely see what works for them. And I know kind of what works in Oklahoma, but obviously I'm always open to new ideas and develop a plan that works best for here.
Yeah, I like your chances. You guys have a great attitude and a great strategy. One thing I want to ask you before we end the conversation here is if there are any resources that we can share. On our website, we often have links to other resources where our listeners can learn more information.
So we are working on our website. So we will be posting a lot of information on our website. So hopefully in the next 4 to 6 months, you can just come to the ODOT website and you'll find a lot of information out there. But right now, we are under construction on our website.
But don't judge the website now. Give it a little bit.
But they can always reach out to Bryce or me about if they have any questions. So we'll be happy to share our experience.
Sounds great. Well, Siv and Bryce, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. And I think we've all learned a lot. I know I have.
Well, cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate the chance to share the information.
Thanks for listening to AASHTO Resource Q&A. If you'd like to be a guest or just submit a question, Send us an email at podcast@ashtoresource.org or call Brian at 240-436-4820. For other news and related content, check out AASHTO Resources social media accounts or go to ashtoresource.org.